And so Viswamitra is going to take Rama and Lakshman to a place called Mithila. And Mithila is the home of King Janaka, which is where Sita is going to be from. Sita is King Janaka's daughter. Now, the intention of the sage, of course, he knows about the male and female aspect, so he wants to get Sita and Rama brought together as man and wife. King Janaka, he was a very good ruler, and he ruled for many, many years, and was given a sacred gift. And this was a holy bow that was given to him by Shiva. The king knew who Sita was. He knew her divine gift, her divine understanding, and he, of course, wanted what was best for her. So he said, what I'm going to do is to set a test using Shiva's bow, so that Sita could only go to the greatest prince, only the one who is truly worthy. Now, if that concept sounds familiar to you, there's good reason for that. This is a very common motif in a lot of mythical stories. Particularly, most people are familiar with it from Odysseus's escapades in the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. Odysseus had a mighty bow, a sacred bow, and he was the only one that knew the secret of stringing that bow. Now, he goes off to war, he's assumed dead, and all the suitors start looking after his wife, wanting to marry her so they can get their hands on his wealth and his power and position and so on. And she pushed them off for as long as possible, but eventually she said, well, I'm going to marry the first person that can string the bow. The first person that can string Odysseus's bow, that's the one I'm going to marry. Because she knew that the only person who knew the secret of how to do that was Odysseus himself. So suitor after suitor came forward, and not a single one of them was going to be able to figure out how to string that bow. It was too big, it was too tight, they didn't understand the process of how to make it work. Only Odysseus understood. And so finally Odysseus comes home, very disguised, and nobody knows who he is, but he comes to the house. He is the first person to ever be able to string that bow. And, of course, then he can reveal his true self to her. So that bow was there to ensure that the only person that Odysseus's wife would be with is him. Well, in like fashion, Shiva's bow is going to have the same kind of idea put into play. The bow of Shiva is going to have a lot of different attempts that's made on it to try to gain the hand of Sita. But both Rama and Sita had descended from the realm of the divine. Shiva's bow is going to ensure that only the male and female aspect of the divine are united and are able to remain together. So let's take a look at this episode, how it plays out in the Ramayana, which would be page 48. Now, in the tone of sharing a secret, Janaka continued, to tell you honestly, my friends, in Mithila we think of Sita as an avatar of the Devi Lakshmi. Never before has this kingdom known such property as we have since we found her. They saw his eyes grow moist as he spoke of Sita. I decided she would only marry a prince who was worthy of her, and we prayed that such a man might come for her someday. Meanwhile, so many Kshatriyas came to Mithila wanting to marry Sita, but I refused them all. One angry king cried to me, "To whom then, Janaka, will you give your daughter?" Without thinking, I replied, "To the man who can lift Shiva's bow and string it." See? The exact same concept. 100 Kshatriyas came, but none of them could move the bow from where it lay, let alone pick it up. Once an alliance of kings brought a great army and surrounded my city. How could I withstand such a force on my own? I prayed to the Devas, and they sent a host from heaven, because I was the guardian of Shiva's bow. How swiftly that battle was concluded. The Kshatriyas fled from the astras of the gods, yet quite a tale hangs by the bow of Shiva. He rose and took Ram and Lakshman by the hand. Come to my palace, and I will have Shiva's bow fetched for you to see. Just within the palace gates, the bow was displayed so that all who passed could look at it. It was kept in an iron casket and worshipped with incense, flowers, and mantras during the 3 sandhyas of the day. Janaka led them to the palace arena, festive with flags, garlands, banners for the yugya. Already thousands of people had streamed into it, and far and near for the sacrifice. When his most recently arrived guests were seated with honor, Janaka clapped his hands to his guards to bring the bow. In its great casket, Shiva's bow was wheeled in. It laid on a low golden cart glimmering with jewels. 100 strong men pulled the massive ropes that dragged the cart of 8 wheels. This was Shiva's bow, with which he had threatened the Devas. The crowd rose. A vast murmur of Om Namaya Shivaya was heard, like an ocean wave in the stadium. Skip on just a little bit. A hush fell on the crowd when Rama rose. He was radiant. He was unworldly blue. He crossed gracefully to the casket. For a moment he stood gazing at the bow. Then a smile lit his face, and he said, Muni, may I touch the bow? Janaka cried, of course. What else have you come for? Viswamitra nodded to Ram. The prince leaned forward and stroked the great weapon with his fingertips. Viswamitra whispered to Janaka, ask him if he can lift it. Janaka shot the rishi a doubtful glance. He was afraid lest this prince could not lift Shiva's bow, for suddenly his heart was set on giving his precious Sita to Ram and no one else. But Viswamitra insisted, bristling his brows at the king. Then Rama himself turned and said in a clear voice, I think I can lift the bow and string it. May I try? A great intuition of destiny swept the people. The crowd was on its feet, ready for a miracle. You may try, cried the king and the sages together. Effortlessly, as if it was his own weapon that he carried at his back every day, Rama picked up Shiva's bow from its casket. The crowd sighed. Calmly, the prince bent the bow and strung it. A thunder flash exploded in his hands. The earth shook, and most of the people fell down stunned. Shiva's awesome bow had snapped in 2. Smiling faintly, Rama placed the pieces back in the casket. The end result is slightly different from what you get in the Odyssey, but you see the same basic motif, the same basic theme coming through. We have this divine God, this divine bow, this powerful bow, and only the individual who can string the bow is going to be able to marry this beautiful individual. In the case of Odysseus, because it was his bow, he was able to string it because he understood the secrets behind it, the technique that had to be used for that. In the case of Rama, he simply picked it up and showed that his strength was so great, so strong, that he could snap, literally break the bow. Forget about stringing it. Okay? I mean, stringing it, he would have only had to have bent it to some extent. But he literally broke the entirety of the bow in 2. And to be able to do that to a divine bow, one that is, the possession of Shiva, one that is, a god's instrument, would imply that he must himself have the power of the gods, that he must in fact be himself a god. And so that idea seems to be revealed through that action. So it's taken to a different, it's taken to a different account, but different end result. But the motif is still essentially the same, and it's a pretty impressive story. So Sita is going to go to the person that can lift and string the bow. And Rama is the one who ultimately shows that he is worthy. And nobody else, of course, can try to string the bow because now it's been snapped. It's been destroyed. The Godhead works to a uniform design. There's always some kind of opposition that comes into play. I mean, that's inevitable in any aspect of Maya, the illusory world that we're in. But the opposition is always part of Maya. It appears as opposition, but in reality it's unity. So unlike the Greek gods, the Hindu pantheon always works towards a common purpose. Rama was sent from Vishnu for the specific purpose of ridding the world of Ravana. But Shiva is going to aid in this program by sending the bow that makes sure that Rama and Sita get united together. And later he's going to help by entering the world again in the form of Hanuman, which is also going to help to maintain and to preserve that union. So we see how everything starts to meld and how everything starts to come together in this particular case. And so we come to page 55, and I won't read the lengthy aspect of it, just one line here. It says, "Heaven above and earth below seem to have become one realm when Rama married Sita." So there's a reunion of Vishnu and Lakshmi that takes place here. The two sides become one. The male and the female aspect are united into the whole. And so this is what the divine ultimately has the capacity to do. Because we have that original notion of there being the one that this world came out of. And so as we get into this world, everything is divided up into these oppositions, these dualities. And so these dualities exist in our material world, but in the ultimate reality, in that absolute truth, those dualities cease to be because they're all brought together as that universal one. And so this is symbolic of that idea of taking the two oppositions and joining them together into the unity of the one. So King Dasharat is going to be informed of the wedding intent. He gives his consent with great joy, with great happiness. And there's a lavish ceremony that takes place, and the two are going to be wed. Rama's brothers are also going to be provided with wives, which are Sita's sisters and cousins. And for the next 12 years, everybody is going to live happily. Rama and Sita are going to grow in affection to each other and be loved by everyone in the entire kingdom. And the people are going to see just exactly who this person is. Who is Rama? Who is Sita? Their divine nature, their divine aspect, the purpose of what they're here for. The people of Ayodhya are going to come to realize this is who they are, and this is what they're here for. And so their love is naturally going to grow even stronger. Now, after a while, Dasharat says, I'm growing tired of ruling. I'm growing tired of governing the land. He's done so for more than 60,000 years. In addition to that, his love for Ram was immense. And he wanted Ram to be the king. And he wanted to see, would the people accept it? Would the people be willing to allow him to retire, to abdicate, and to allow Ram to take over the kingdom? Would that be possible? Let's take a look at the bottom of 66. We will see Ram soaked with the waters of the Abhisheka and his head under the white parasol, cried someone, and the crowd roared for Rama to be king. Dasharatha held up his hand again. Though his heart was full of joy, he said, I thought you were happy with my reign. Why this unseemly delight at the very thought of Ram being crowned? But there was a twinkle in his eye. His people shouted their replies. Because he's Ram, yelled someone simply. We love him, cried another. He has more truth in him than the Devas, said a woman. He's the greatest of Ikshvakus. He is brilliant, the strongest Kshatriya of them all, wise beyond his years. He is one of us. He cries when we do. Even the earth wants Ram for her king. She told me in a dream. He is blue as a night lotus. He is Vishnu's avatar. He is beautiful in his body and his soul. My face wreathed in smile, Dasharatha cried to Vaishta above the din. My lord, let us prepare to crown Rama Yuvaraja. Vashita ordered the city of Ayodhya to be got ready for the coronation. Let there be flowers everywhere, from the palace arches to the streets, and though they sprouted for joy at this news. Let the royal road along which Ram rides his elephant be perfumed like the gardens of Amravata. Let there be music and dance. I, Vashishta, says to you that Gandhavaras will sing in the sky when Ram is crowned, and Apsaras will dance on the clouds. And Dasharatha called Sumantra and said, bring my son to me. So the praise you can get from that passage, the praise for Ram, it's unparalleled. You know, the people of Ayodhya are more than willing. Yes, they were happy with King Dasharatha, but they understand how important he ultimately is. Who would not want to see God sitting on the throne? So it was decided that the king would abdicate, that Ram would become the new ruler. The coronation date was set. Now, Ram's other brothers that we haven't spoke about recently, Bharat and Shutraguna, they were visiting their grandmother in another part of the kingdom. They weren't present when this announcement was made that the king was going to step down and that Ram was going to take over. Bharat's mother, Kaikeyi, and all of the other queens are very excited by the news of the coronation. They all loved Ram. But a demon is going to tempt and manipulate Kaikeyi. And this is where all of the problems in this story are going to begin. But to find out what those problems are, you either have to read it yourself or you have to wait until Wednesday, and I'll tell you some more of the story.